Welcome back, Muertos, to Monster Month. I am the Green Scorpion, and for the finale of our macabre quintet, I bring you the most spine-tingling spookmasters of them all, the spooky, scary skeletons. Reanimated skeletons, to be precise, because really, aren't we all skeletons deep down? There's been no particular origin for them as a horror icon, but the image of a skinless animal has always created an obvious association with death. Osteological creatures appear in folklore here and there, the Book of Ezekiel, the Brothers Grimm, etc. But it's modern fantasy that most utilizes them as the skeletal beasts and warriors we've come to know them as. These monsters of marrow can achieve true fear under the right conditions, and they're easy to outfit with armor or weapons for various levels of challenge, but they also have the potential to be some of the goofiest in the Halloween roster. Maybe it's because they're always smiling, maybe because they just inspire a dark sense of humor, or maybe it's because of the easy puns. But they never fail to be... humorous? Ugh. We'll take them scary or silly, so long as they've worked themselves to the bone. Ugh. So let the skullduggery begin. These are the top 10 skeletons in video games. Comic foil, I got a bone to pick with you. Ah, dang it, now I'm doing it! The setting Atlus created for Persona 3 is interesting to say the least. By day you explore the characters at Gekkoukan High School, and by night you explore and battle through Tartarus. It's a stark juxtaposition, but I'm always having a blast no matter where I... Okay, what's that sound? You hear that, right? That clinking sound? Oh, son of a... Gaming has a lot of versions of the Grim Reaper because there's so many ways of expressing the abstruse concept of termination. Darksiders 2 depicts death as an awesome force of order, Greg from Conker's Bad Fur Day lampoons the subject, and Castlevania's death exemplifies the inevitability of your demise by the sheer number of appearances. But it's the Reaper from Persona 3 that epitomizes humanity's fear of its own end. You can fight the Reaper, but you probably won't stand a chance if you're under level 70. Problematic since he's roaming the dungeons from the very beginning of the game. With practically every skill in the game, resistances to most damage types, and 2 ludicrously long pistols, this guy is almost certain to kill you unless you've assembled that specific strategy to stunlock him with Odin and all-out cancels. If you spend too long on one floor, he'll eventually show up, Fuko will freak out, and you'll hear those horrible chains. You can also summon him with a really unfortunate round of shuffle time. Seeing that card gives me PTSD, I swear. At least shadows never follow you up ramps. Oh god, he can follow you up ramps! Death is inevitable. You can tell they had a lot of fun statting this guy. He has 4,444 HP. The Japanese word for 4 is homonymous with the word for death, shi. He came back in Persona 4, hiding in boxes now, and in Persona Q, his HP is 13,666. That is a scary number. Everything about him is foreboding, from the sounds to the card and the one ever watchful eye. Which reminds me, Pseudo from Persona 2 lost his right eye too, and he wore similar clothes. You don't think... Okay, that's it, you're getting stunlocked. I'm sure seeing a reanimated skeleton in real life would freak me out, but years of the internet have conditioned me to giggle whenever I see them. We need at least one numbskull in here, and who better than Sir Daniel Fortesque? Despite it being horror-themed, MediEvil isn't what most would call a scary game. Unless you're scared of early full-motion video, in which case, yeah, me too. But this necrotic knight sells the game on charm alone. Long ago in the kingdom of Gallowmere, Dan was known for spinning tales of heroism and wonder. The king enjoyed these stories so much that he made Dan an honorary knight of his rarely used army. But the peaceful land was invaded by an evil sorcerer, and Sir Daniel was chosen as just the kind of morale-boosting leader that Gallowmere needed. Dan rallied his forces to face evil Zarok, and got killed by the first arrow fired. A century later, Zarok returned to raise all the fallen warriors as his new undead legion, but the revived Dan has so many points in charisma that he couldn't be turned evil. Dan took up the sword and swore to become the hero that everyone wanted him to be. He can't tell stories without his missing lower jaw, but he's one heck of a warrior with a diverse array of weapons. He also reminds me a lot of Don Quixote. You know, the haphazard wannabe knight by Cervantes? No, not that Cervantes. That one. It's a story about what can be accomplished with optimism, personality, and having nothing left to lose. As Daniel's narrator says, bravery and folly are often confused, but either can achieve a positive end. And in 1910, Don Quixote was popularly represented in art as... wow, a skeleton. Well, there you go. I'm really glad they resurrected Sir Daniel for PlayStation All-Stars. I was hoping that the appearance would prompt a return for the series, but if the franchise is truly dead, well, at least Sir Daniel looks the part. You don't have to look far to find skeletons in video games. Sometimes, you just have to look near. In Nier's journey through a desolate wasteland to save his daughter, he comes across a little boy and our number 8 pick, Emil. I know, he looks like a regular human, but give it time. There's not really a good way to explain this without spoiling the entire game, so skip ahead if you're planning to play this critically underrated gem. So back in my top 10 boomerang wielders, I got serious backlash for saying that I liked Hope Estheim. I get it, he's kind of whiny. Well, Emil's a lot like that, only he has way more reason to complain. It's bad enough that he has to live in the bad ending of Drakengard, but you'll also notice that Emil is blindfolded at all times. That's because his eyes have an inexplicable Medusa effect that petrifies anyone he sees. Or is it anyone who sees them? I was always a little confused about that. To protect others, Emil lives his whole life blind, getting by with some keen daredevil senses. It's eventually revealed that Emil was a biological weapon engineered with science and magic, and he was eventually labeled number 7. He was endowed with his powers so he could stop his sister Halua, or number 6, when her powers got out of control. When Nier and Emil confront Halua, Emil manages to absorb her power, gaining mastery not only over his stone vision, but all magic. Unfortunately, it comes at the cost of his skin and a normal-sized head. All things considered, he takes it pretty well. He whines like Hope from time to time, but Emil still embellishes the party with humor and even genuine optimism from time to time. I've been asking myself, why did the developers choose a skeleton? Is it because it looks cool? Well, yeah, but also there's an interesting progression throughout the game. We see Emil incrementally losing his humanity, not only as he gains power, but also as he completes milestones of his life. As a child, he willingly chooses to live without eyes, a vital human organ. By finally gaining closure with his sister, he ceases to be human but also isn't quite dead. His life is not his own now, but guided by specific purpose. His outfit covers his arms, making it appear like he's fading away. He also floats now, no longer grounded to earth. He regains sight, not in a human way, but more symbolically as a sign of his new wisdom. And, in the end, he concludes the process with a tear-jerking sacrifice to save his friends. It's up there as one of the best video game deaths of all time. Or at least, it would be. Beating the game a second time reveals that Emil survived, but just his skull. Now he's even less of a human, having fulfilled more of his destiny, but now all he can talk about is finding some new legs so he can get back with his friends. In a Samuel Beckett-style world, all things waste and pine, and Emil's skeletal body marks him for a surreptitious death. But Emil looks fate in the face and says, "Screw that, I'm not gonna brood until my screen time is up, I'm gonna help the world as long as I can with whatever I got. There's a sequel coming and damn it, I'm gonna be in it." By that logic, if Hope was reduced to a disembodied head, I think he'd have been better received. There's many a thing to avoid when playing Diablo. Spiders, demons, connectivity issues, but at some point in the town of Tristram, someone's at least going to mention the tragic tale of Leoric, the Skeleton King. He was just a simple ruler, celebrated and loved by his people, all except a sinister archbishop who helpfully suggested he set up his seat of power right by the cathedral where Diablo was sealed. Diablo wished to use the king as his new vessel, and slowly corrupted Leoric into madness. He began lashing out, accusing his advisors of treason and even imprisoning his own wife. His people's respect crumbled away, but even then, within his heart, he still held that last bit of devout faith, and Diablo was ultimately unable to possess him. Instead, Diablo used Leoric's son. Leoric became violent and destructive until his knights were forced to execute him. Though Diablo had returned, he's a sore loser, and out of spite, he refused to let Leoric rest. He then resurrected him as the Skeleton King. King Leoric could be faced as a multiplayer boss in the original Diablo, reanimating an endless supply of skeletal warriors. It was just as he said in his last words: even in death, his army served him. He can be defeated, but he is never permitted to rest. In Diablo 3, the falling star resurrects all of the dead in Tristram, and Leoric's spirit is stirred yet again, this time as, oh boy, a skeletal ghost. To put him down, the heroes must race through his dungeon, evading troops and traps, reclaim his old crown, find his bony body propped up on the throne, and bind the spirit and body together before defeating him one last time. Still, I get that the body had to be intact first for this to work, but could we have at least taken the giant mace away from him before we put the crown on? This guy's been drinking his calcium. He does not let up! Not only did he keep coming back in Diablo, Leoric cropped up in a couple of MOBAs. The mod Dota All-Stars usually stuck to Warcraft cameos like Thrall and Sylvanas, but King Leoric was present as Skeleton King, a strength-based hero whose defining quality was his ultimate, allowing him to fully resurrect himself on the spot after death. It has a long cooldown, but man, the rage this induces! When Dota 2 seceded from Blizzard, Skeleton King lost the name Leoric, and now he's changed again into the Wraith King. But that's okay, Leoric will just go start his own MOBA. In Heroes of the Storm, when he dies, he releases a spectral form that impedes opponents. If he can get back up to full health, he's back to bones. Okay, I know that reanimated skeletons are often synonymous with undeath and immortality, but seriously, this is getting ridiculous. And all the while, all I can think is that he was once a kindly leader who never asked for any of this. We'd love to end your suffering, Leoric, but you're just too damn cool.
I am Leoric, the Skeleton King, and I will only choose allies who I know will never betray me.
Time for another representative character because I need to talk about Stalfos. Appearing in every Legend of Zelda entry, these skeletal minions are card-carrying members of every force of darkness. They marched in the original, downthrusted in the Adventure of Link, tormented us in Link to the Past, and Ocarina of Time added Stal Children and the reassembling Stalfos Knights. Majora's Mask had the entire Ikana Canyon run by departed royalty. Wind Waker had these spinning berserkers, and Skyward Sword made you sword fight against four-armed warriors. So who can best represent the race in its entirety? I thought about the hero Shade, who is heavily implied to be a past rendition of Link aiding the new hero, and Captain Kita and King Ikana are also great choices. But I'm going to have to think bigger than that. Way bigger. Stallord can be found in the dark recesses of the Arbiter's grounds, where Link and Midna seek the Mirror of Twilight. That already raises a lot of questions. We're in the Gerudo Desert, but there are no Gerudo. There are only legions of pike-wielding skeletons. This is also where Ganondorf was executed after the Triforce War, so it's safe to say that these skeletons are Gerudo. Oh man! Well, what does that make Stallord? He breathes fire and had a long body with horns and long arms. His music also incorporates part of King Dodongo's fight from Ocarina of Time, so some have speculated that this is his skeleton, resurrected by Zant. The more popular opinion is that it's Volvagia, who also breathed fire. The size is a little off, but if you think about it, we never saw Volvagia die in this timeline. And it's been hundreds more years. Maybe the dragon grew before he was slain. In any case, this boss fight is awesome. Stallord seems to have some control over the sand pit, and the only way you're going to get to him is with the most underutilized item in Zelda history, the spinner. You run along the rim of the pit, line up your shot, and pinball yourself at the enemy's spine while avoiding the spears of endless Stal troops. The troops seem to listen to Stallord, whoever he is. Funny enough, the name Stallord was already used in the Ocarina of Time manga, given to Ganondorf's commander of the skeletal army. So that's a neat inclusion. The battle continues with you racing along the walls and flinging yourself at Stallord's disembodied head. It's a little on the easy side, but it's probably the most high-octane of the Twilight Princess bosses. and it stands out in memory whenever I think about the game. It must have stood out for Nintendo too, because they brought him back as the final boss of Link's crossbow training. Hey, shut up, I like this game! I don't know why they picked Stallord and not Ganondorf, but I think that they were trying to make this game actually take place after Twilight Princess, and Stallord's the only boss we could really expect to return. I'm always excited to see new takes on the classic enemies, but if you got all the Stalfos in one room together, they'd all bend knee to this guy. Hand over the crown, Igos, your reign is over. How about one more embodiment of death to round out the list? Who do we have here? Oh dear, he's made of skeletons! I never fully submerged myself into the Soulsborne games. The first Dark Souls pounded me into the ground a bit too hard, so it's not something I put the time and effort into mastering. As a result, I don't have any experience with the Skeleton Lord from Dark Souls 2 or Wolnir from Dark Souls 3. But Gravelord Nito is something special. The lore here is a bit hard to grasp, absolutely requiring outside sources to understand, so let's wiki through this. The world was once separated into the above, ruled by dragons, and the below, where all other creatures lived. But when the power of fire was discovered, King Gwyn decided that he was quite tired of living under the draconic law. He led a culling against the dragons, aligning himself with the Witch of Izalith, Seath the Scaleless, and Gravelord Nito. Nito turned the tides by unleashing illness on the dragons, and after their victory, Nito took his rightful place as the Lord of Death. It gets pretty complicated from there. The lords want to keep the power of fire going, which can be done through human sacrifice. They unleash a plague of undead that will rise again and again, and start a church dedicated to fighting the undead. Since the dead always rise, there's always killing to satisfy the flame. It's a cruel and vicious cycle that causes misery across the land, but it's also the only thing keeping the original darkness at bay. So are you really the good guy for disrupting this pattern of life and death? I don't think there are good guys in Dark Souls, only survivors. You have the option to join Nito's covenant and become a Gravelord servant, spreading corruption to other players' game worlds using the Eyes of Death. Well, that's fun if a little misanthropic, but either way, you'll eventually have to fight Nito to finish the game. Setting aside the fact that you're fighting a god, Nito is considered middle of the road in terms of boss difficulty, which for Dark Souls is still pretty tough. The preceding trek through his tombs is full of horrid permutations of human bone, and even in the chamber where you fight him, minions large and small interfere with your duel. It all depends on how you approach him. Nito has a tendency to smash through his own troops, so staying in melee quarters is one option. If you're more of a ranged fighter, you can exploit his weakness to fire while staying out of his broadsword's perimeter, but then you're more likely to proc the big skellies before you mean to. Either way, his miasma attack is going to cause some frustration. It killed the dragons, and it can certainly kill you. This fight is held in high regard by veteran Soulsborners. I think that's because of how well it facilitates different playstyles, providing a unique challenge to each approach. Personally, I find it interesting that you can stay in his covenant even after you yourself kill him. I think it's because Nito is still satisfied as long as death continues. He told me to go out and kill something, and I did. So I ended up asking myself, is leaving this bleak gray world really so terrible? He gets his favorite thing, rest. And now I have to go and fight the Four Kings. So who's the real loser here? Conra, Hisako, Mira, Saberwolf, and now, Spinal. I've always wanted an excuse to make that joke. But no, seriously. Killer Instinct has become a regular monster mash. Before the Golem and the Microsoft cameos, Spinal was an original member of the 90s KI roster, and the character that made this game stick out in the arcades. I could find ninjas and cyborgs in Mortal Kombat, but a skeleton warrior straight out of Jason and the Argonauts? I'm in. His backstory drastically changes from game to game. At one point he was a puppet to Gargos, and in another he was a warrior revived by Ultratech. Now he's an ancient Babylonian bandit turned crazed undead pirate. He's been used by everyone, now he just wants to spread misery, and he's having a great time doing it. One thing I love about the new Killer Instinct is the way it updated the characters to reflect what's popular today. Like how Tusk was originally modeled off of Arnold Schwarzenegger as Conan, but now he's totally Chris Hemsworth. In Spinal's case, he was definitely inspired by the Ray Harryhausen film, but his new iteration closer resembles Pirates of the Caribbean. You can call it pandering to new trends, but I think it's an interesting way to observe how our 20th century tropes have been repackaged for the new millennium. It's a celebration of cult media. With his ghostly Sinnohs, Spinal is a highly technical rushdown character. His normals are a bit on the slow side, but several of his abilities grant him these floating green skulls, which he can then expend for a variety of cool effects. This includes giant arms that grasp for life, a surprising teleport, and these fireballs that can curse opponents and sap their meter, which really limits what they can do to retaliate. Sure, this system means that he starts the fight at his weakest, but when he gets going, he does not stop, completely overwhelming enemies with oppressive projectiles, constant change-ups, and an amazing forward-running animation. Also, that cackle is contagiously gleeful. What started as a stock character evolved into the peak of the Skeletal Knight archetype. So, can we get a death battle between him and Sir Daniel Fortesque? Don't lie, you know that would be awesome.
Supreme victory!
From Guacamelee, this is Carlos Calaca. First of all, let me just say that I love this game. Smooth platforming, an intuitive combat system, and an oasis in the deserted genre of Metroidvania. But what I love most is its loving incorporation of Mexican folklore and culture. No, that's not just my nationalism, I'm Honduran, not Mexican. I just appreciate how faithfully this game embraces not just the obvious stereotypes, but the spirit of the country's festivities. There's luchadores and the mariachi band, but there's also Xtabe and the alebrije. Seriously, look that stuff up! It all revolves around El Día de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. For those of you who don't know, El Día de los Muertos is a holiday originally celebrated by the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs had a very interesting view of the afterlife. Most people who died went to the same place, the realm of Mictlan. Regardless of whether they were good or bad people in life, souls would make a 4-year journey through the 9 underworlds to get to their final destination, unless they were fallen soldiers or something. However, on El Día de los Muertos, the souls returned to the world of the living to visit their loved ones. The Aztecs had a less morbid disposition towards death than most. The dead, in many ways, were more alive than we were, as illustrated by the vibrant colors in Guacamelee's Dead World. The holiday changed meaning somewhat after the Aztec Empire was conquered by Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s. Spain introduced Catholicism to what is now Mexico, and El Día de los Muertos was considered a pagan holiday for a time, until eventually it was moved from early August to late October to coincide with All Saints' Day. The holiday now gels more with Mexico's primarily Christian outlook, but is often associated with the Halloween of other countries because October and skeletons. I know this seems like I'm rambling, but it's going to be very important later. Carlos gets his last name from calacas, skeletal figures that are used for decoration on the holiday. In life, Carlos Calaca was a renowned champion of charreria, the national Mexican sport of horse riding and taming. He was poised to win every award and merit in the league, but the day before the last competition, he broke his arm. Devastated, he made a literal deal with the devil, selling his soul for a mended limb. Calaca won the games, but before he could even touch his trophy, El Diablo collected his due. The only way the dead truly die is from being forgotten. And without a family, this was his one chance at everlasting fame. So Carlos takes his revenge. He seduces the sorceress Xtabe, has El Diablo transformed into a chicken, and takes over hell itself. But that's not enough. He tunnels out of El Infierno, assembles an army of skeletons, conquers the dead world, and breaks into the living world in an attempt to bind the two together and rule over the resulting chaos. Even the people suffering in hell don't like Calaca. Sure, El Diablo was cruel, but at least he did his paperwork. After a whirlwind adventure, you face Calaca, and Dios mío, he is tough. He throws every mechanic of the game at you, moving lightning fast, jumping between worlds, and employing those multicolored shields that can only be broken by certain moves. Sure, lots of other enemies have those shields, but Calaca recharges his with every dang attack, making this fight extremely annoying if you happen to be partly colorblind. Like me. but I persevered to his final form. The new demonic body kind of ruined this pick for me, until I watched a presentation from GDC 2014 by project leader Augusto Guijano. The presentation was The Art of Making Guacamelee. He explains that to get the skeletons to pop out in the front of these lush backdrops, they needed to fill in the negative space, just like Mexican cutout art. This is usually done with black, but here it's done with orange, which in Mexico is seen as the color of the dead. I know that's still a little iffy, and it looks like he's got some flesh there, but due to the completion of his ritual, Calaca is now embodying life, the afterlife, and the inferno all in one. Well, Calaca, you didn't become a god of mortality like you wanted, but you certainly achieved memorability. Give this guy a trophy. If you think this entry won't have Undertale spoilers, you're gonna have a bad time. Of course it's Sans. How could it not be Sans? I'm more surprised he's not number 1. It was hard picking between him and his brother. I love Papyrus, he's one of my favorite characters. I even cosplayed him, with striking detail if I may be so bold. But while Papyrus masters the hokey side of skeletons, Sans has everything else going for him. The mystery, the power, the character, and the puns. Oh lord, the puns! Even comics puns aren't this bad. Wait, Comic Sans. Oh my god! I wish I could somehow replay Undertale without prior knowledge of Sans. That's the first thing most people get spoiled on. A short little hoodlum who also happens to be the hardest boss fight in the game. If I didn't know he had some kind of deeper significance, I might not have seen it coming. For a while, he's just Papyrus's unwilling sidekick. He's clearly the smarter of the two, but abjectly lazy. He can't even be bothered to use proper capitalization. But he's got this weird habit of always walking off in the wrong direction and still ending up where he needs to be. Is it an oversight of the game? No, Toby Fox doesn't do that. Even once you leave Papyrus behind, Sans keeps appearing as something of a guardian angel. Except he's not an angel, he's a skeleton. And he's mostly just messing with you, except, is he? He's also got this anonymous connection with Toriel, which is hauntingly tragic if your boss fight with her went south. While Papyrus works his tailbone off to be imposing, Sans is actually kind of terrifying at times. Nothing seems to bother him, and yet sometimes it's like he's holding back this deep pain or anger. Then towards the end, he appears to judge you for all of your sins. What is going on here? A full character study of Sans could outlast this entire video. In neutral and true pacifist runs, you get a good idea of his personality and the sense that he's actually pretty powerful. But to get down to motivation, you need to go dark. By killing every single enemy in the game, Sans promotes himself from judge to executioner. It's speculated that at some point, something happened to give Sans limited powers over time and space, probably having something to do with W.D. Gaster and that weird machine in his workshop. Basically, Sans somehow has awareness over the state of this world. It's a video game, controlled largely by a player, and when that player gets bored, they reset the game. This justifies Sans' indolent nature. Why do anything if it's all going to get erased? It's not just nihilism, he conclusively knows his efforts are futile. He's existentially depressed. Still, you the player can give him cautious hope of a better future, or in the genocide run, commit so many heinous acts that he finally can't stand by any longer. Oh my god, this boss fight. I thought for a while the skeleton identity was just for the jokes. Gaijin Goomba claims that he's a revenant, a Celtic spirit of justice, and MatPat poses that he may be Ness after a transdimensional incident after Earthbound, an interesting if somewhat cherry-picked theory. My take on it? I think he's a skeleton metaphorically, because he's redesigned himself to live between life and death. He's given up. He's just powerful enough to know just how powerless he really is, and now he's filling his pointless eternity with ketchup and bad jokes. Luckily, you have the power to free the underground and never reset it again. Only, will you? Sure, you'll get the pacifist ending, but are you really going to keep that undeleted copy of Undertale on your desktop unused forever? Hey, I'm rooting for you, kid. 4 years ago, I started my first ever weapons month by placing Manny Calavera as the number 10 scythe wielder. In retrospect, this was short-sighted. Manny's not much of a fighter, and the spot could have been better occupied. Hi, Piestol. But I think I chose Manny because, subconsciously, I had a deep appreciation for the character that I only now have the words to express. So let me explain why Manny is the greatest skeleton in video games and why Grim Fandango is one of the most interesting commentaries on life after death. So we're back to the Aztec afterlife. Remember that from a couple of entries ago? Well, like I said, it's very important. From the accents to the use of Spanish, it's safe to say that this game takes place in a modernized Mexican version of Mictlan. But this version's a little more faithful to the Aztec roots. There's no infierno like in Guacamelee. Manny Calavera is a Grim Reaper, which in this world is more like a blue-collar travel agent. He picks up souls from the land of the living and arranges trips to their resting place in the ninth underworld. He's holding down this job to pay off some debt to the powers that be before he can move on himself. It's never really explained who he was in life though, and he claims that he can't even remember what he did to end up here. To get out, he has to sell the premium travel packages to the departing departed. The best being a train that leads straight to the other side free of hassle. But only those who lived exemplary lives are eligible for those tickets, and the powers that be only give Manny the shadiest clients. So he's trapped in mundanity until he decides he's fed up. He breaks into the mailroom and steals one of his co-workers' clients, a sinless philanthropist named Meche.
Guess they couldn't save me, huh?
No, but there's still a chance you could save me.
But apparently due to Manny's meddling, Meche's ticket is lost and Manny gets fired. He gets rescued by Salvador and his resistance group against the powers that be, but Manny's not really interested in social justice. Instead, he sets out to find Meche and escort her to a deserved afterlife, half out of guilt and half because he thinks the good deed will earn him a ticket of his own. Yeah, Manny's got some loose morals. Throughout the game, we see him get ahead by manipulating others. He's certainly crafty. It took him little time to rise from janitor to casino owner, or cabin boy to captain of his own ship. But his success is often at the expense of others. The people he wrongs usually deserve it, but you gotta feel bad for some of them. Like Naranja, who Manny knocks out and gets pronounced dead so he can steal his spot on the ship. Or when Manny takes advantage of Glottis's gambling problem and alcoholism. That's your best friend, Manny! But he's just so damn charming. He's got all of these dry quips, made even better by the fact that he barely moves while talking. And despite the shady practices, he's got a heart in there too. I mean, not literally, but you know. Towards the end, he actually has the chance to walk through the tunnel to his eternal reward, but he refuses to leave his friends behind and goes back to get everyone's lost tickets. He ends up uncovering a conspiracy by a man named Hector, who's corrupting the system to steal those precious tickets and build a monopoly between worlds. So here's the mind-blowing stuff. I don't know if LucasArts originally intended it this way. In fact, I'm almost certain they didn't. But Hector's corruption of the underworld industry is a startling parallel to the Spanish Empire and their conquering and Christianizing of Aztec civilization and tradition. Now, I'm not trying to say anything bad about Spain or Christianity, but the philosophical implication of this game is incredible. Why don't we ever find out who Manny was or what he did before he died? Because it doesn't matter. In the original Aztec belief, all people good and evil went to the same place and made the same harrowing journey to find peace. It's a fresh start, tabula rasa. But under the Catholic belief, under Hector's conglomerate, there's a morality system. It's not clear or even likely that Hector himself imposed the morality system, but good people are getting easy rides to the great beyond while bad people have to travel by snail mail, and Hector uses this doctrine for his own greedy benefit. Manny, unintentionally mind you, breaks the mold and ends up on a fantastic journey of moral grayness. It's no coincidence that the game takes place over 4 years. That's how long it's specified to take the journey in the original mythos, and Manny improves as a person from the journey. And for that matter, so does Meche, challenging her saintly perfection and making her stronger. This, the game suggests, is how it's supposed to be, and Manuel Calavera, through actions good and bad, helps return the afterlife to this system. That's an interesting thing to do for a guy named Manuel, which in Latin means God is among us. Skeletons can be scary or funny depending on how we relate to death, but Grim Fandango is as profoundly subtle as it is hilarious. He may seem stiff, but Manny Calavera is up there as one of the most surprisingly nuanced characters in video games. He illustrates with optimism that death is just the thing you do after life, but in a realistic, easily relatable tone. And he proves that it's never too late to turn yourself around and be a better person when you want to be. Morality is no consequence. I am the Green Scorpion, and thank you for joining me for Monster Month, even if it ended with someone less monstrous and more extraordinarily human. Happy Halloween, Feliz Dia de los Muertos, and I hope you enjoy your continued journey.
Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your spine.